fair enough. Then we're going to move on to the next presentation, which will be by Julia. So I'm going to do the little introduction for her. Julia Köwitz García is an MA student in Literary Studies at Complutense University of Madrid, and a graduate student in modern literature and modern languages and their literatures at the same university, majoring in German. So her main area of interest encompasses the intersections between philosophy, literature, and art, especially with the strong relationship between these fields in German Romanticism. Julia, I'm hoping you're there.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I really thank you for the opportunity to be here presenting my research on boredom. So I will be sharing a summary of my upcoming research. Thank you so much. Okay, great. So yes, hello everyone, I'm Julia, as I said. Thank you for being here, it's such a pleasure. I will be sharing the summary of my upcoming research. I really hope you enjoy listening, and of course, I'm open to questions when I finish sharing. So, my article attempts to examine and review the perception of boredom in German Romanticism through a thorough analysis of three literary works, Fantasie über die Kunst by Wackenroder Antik, Eichendorff's Krieg den Philistern, Antiques der Wundenwerk, as well as two theoretical essays written around 1800. The article's thesis is based on the hypothesis that, for the Romantics, boredom constitutes a metaphysical opportunity insofar as for them it acts as a clairvoyant mirror, showing the subject the absurdity of his or her life, which has hitherto been developed unidimensionally as a phenomenon of the will, speaking in Schopenhauer's terms. This opens up the possibility of accessing a higher existence whose driving force is the negation of the will to live, or in other words, the pure knowledge granted by art and aesthetic contemplation. Especially noteworthy is the fact that if there's a link between boredom as a literary motif, romantic motif, and boredom as a concept theorized by Schopenhauer, this relationship has to be rooted in the realm of art. So, the first chapter of my research will therefore be based on the historical context of boredom as described by Kant and Schopenhauer respectively. The second one will analyze the specific properties of the genius and Philistine's boredom motifs, as well as their underlying implications, since they are very, very different. The third and last chapter draws the parallels between Wackenroder's sign theory of art and the romantic motif of the bored genius. Both art and boredom are considered as a potential temporary access to the absolute, a fact which stems from Haman's ideas, which executed a significant influence on early Romanticism. Given the strong historical component of this research and the need to update and contrast the literary motif with the latest research on boredom, Ros Velasco's methodology will be followed, since this theoretical framework unifies the historical component of boredom with an updated analysis. And it is worth studying this approximate epochal marker of boredom, as Jürgen Grube names it, because it embraces certain ideas of Kant and foreshadows the aesthetic ideas of Schopenhauer. And according to Grube, when one considers this revaluation that boredom undergoes at this time, it becomes clear that this perception sowed the seeds for the metaphysical peak that boredom reached in the works of Heidegger. Great. So, during the 18th century, most philosophers were particularly concerned with the balance of the faculties of the soul. For Kant, the only way to guarantee this balance was through work. Therefore, he considered boredom derived from a purely unproductive activity and even defined it as the cancer of pure practical reason, as Ros Velasco puts it. Boredom implies avoiding existence and a failure to contribute to the Kantian moral imperative. Sanchez Madrid refers to the origin of boredom as described by Kant. The melancholic temperament and character as a potential source of boredom endangers the subject's connection with their own life. According to Kant, the melancholic individual tends to reflect on himself, ignoring the important fact that a healthy soul always occupies itself with something outside itself. It was not until the Romantic era that boredom regained a positive, almost epiphanic connotation. In the Romantic worldview, which fled from the Enlightenment's productivity precepts, a new idea acquired an importance that was unthinkable for rationalist scholars: the idea of the absolute, and with it the existence of a temporary revelation of it by means of enthusiastic inspiration. In this vein, temporary artistic epiphanies within a boring bourgeois life became the most desired goal. Moving away from Kant's ideas on boredom, the Romantic writers start a positive depiction of it insofar as they describe it as a potential precursor to a poetic existence inside the genius imagination. So, in his dramatic satire Krieg den Philistern, Eichendorff launches a twofold criticism of the Philistines on the one hand, who are explicitly called out for their utilitarian orientation, and on the other hand of the politicians, who are a double of the former and equally faithful to practical interests, devoid of authentic artistic ideals. This explains why one of them reaffirms industry as the most important sphere of society. Thus, the satire offers little hope. Philistines are everywhere, including those who call themselves such, and those who appear to have initiated a war against them. The individual devoted to art, the true romantic genius, does not appear at any time. A soldier belonging to the poet's faction is bored, as his comrades are, since from time to time yarns are heard everywhere, fact which reflects that he is a Philistine. Would that my enthusiasm did not escape me! I grit my teeth and I think of my marvelous exploits. Nothing can help. I pinch my calves. Time passes, but it does not go away. The doctor immediately identifies his situation. That is boredom, he says. By drawing a critical portrait of those who call themselves poets, Eichendorff questions the Biedermeier literary movement, which was founded on the comfort of a petty bourgeoisie. The poet-soldier's aversion to boredom serves as a sign, as in Schopenhauer's philosophy, of an evident lack of poetic vocation and sensibility. For these characters, boredom is not an awakening, it is not a stepping stone to pure knowledge. Rather, it is an unpleasant feeling from which they wish to escape without reflection. I pinch my calves, says the fifth soldier. It is noteworthy that Eichendorff describes his Philistines' boredom without providing any details about their surroundings. Instead, he emphasizes their unwillingness to take an interest in anything in life, so that following Ros Velasco's research, we could identify it as an individual dependent and chronic boredom. This typology is not surprising, given Eichendorff's interest in denouncing the accommodating attitudes of Biedermeier writers and liberal politicians of the time. The source of the problem is deliberately placed in the psychology of a social group that, around the time the text was published in 1823, threatened to insert again the rationalist principles of the Enlightenment. Unlike the individuals of the world portrayed by Eichendorff in his satire, Bakenrood and Tieck describe the boredom experienced by the chosen few who can access the realm of pure knowledge. They query out what Schopenhauer calls the salvation of the will. Romantic genius challenges the notion of his existence as mere natural or phenomenal life, a mere placed at the will's egoistic whim. On the contrary, he is excited by the idea of an existence elevated by knowledge, that is to say, life as a representation, purely intuited or reproduced by art. In Fantasie über die Kunst, Joseph Wellinger experiences such a realization through boredom. First, he suffers from chronified situation-dependent boredom due to the monotonous, repetitive nature of his life marked by work. And it reads as follows: joy, pain, toil, and struggle, everything was now at peace, only to burst forth again tomorrow. So there's a clear mismatch between his individual expectations and the constraints imposed by the environment. But then, thanks to his genius and his critical capacity, that initial feeling becomes a lucid awareness of his position within the world, and with it he now discovers the meaninglessness of mere existence. Oh, this in-season monotonous alternation of thousands of days and nights, the life of man and the life of the world as a whole, is nothing but a strange board game. Finally, and more importantly, he discovers the consolation which art procures in the following passage. However, we must courageously break through the jumble of ruins into which our lives are crumbling, and cling tightly to art, the great and enduring form that reaches beyond all things into eternity. Boredom acts here as a sign of the metaphysical emptiness of existence, opening up the possibility that art minimizes the sufferings imposed by the will. However, it is noteworthy that the chronified situation-dependent boredom experienced by Joseph Wellinger, as it is shaped by the demands of industrial work and the social modes of the epoch, functions for Wackenroder not only as a manifestation of his profound disillusionment towards the prevailing social order, but also, and most significantly, as an expression of an aesthetic predicament. In this vein, the influence of his teacher and art historian Fiorello prompted Wackenroder to depart from neoclassical norms and ideas, a development that placed him ahead of his time. In his literary works, Wackenroder established the foundations of a novel aesthetic based on two fundamental principles. Firstly, he imagines a deistic or pantheistic creator who encompasses all forms of worship. And secondly, he establishes a historical and cultural relativism that pervades the artistic domain, thereby affirming that every work of art possesses its own set of governing principles, thus rejecting the prescriptive norms of neoclassicism. Wackenroder argues against the existence of a universal aesthetic law, claiming that each work of art has its own right to a distinct character. In Wackenroder's words, the works are not there for the eye to see, but for one to enter into them with a receptive heart. The boredom experienced by Wellinger is therefore rooted in an aesthetic dilemma, as the Fantasie über die Kunst engage in a dialogue with the prevailing art historical discourses of the time. Indeed, not only Joseph Wellinger will respond to his boredom by embracing an artistic existence. Christian, the main figure of Eichendorff's Die Runenwerk, will live his boring life as a series of cycles of repetitive regularity and will move to the mountains, where he will direct his creative energies towards the aesthetic observation of inorganic natural phenomena. Accordingly, his attention is henceforth focused on the artistic eternity that the rich inner world offers him. He looked behind the glare and discovered that he could see an ancient and spacious room, wonderfully ornamented with various stones and crystals, which sparkled in multiple flashes, mysteriously intermingled by the changing light. Christian's encounter with the sublime beauty of the mountains does not result in a rejection, but in spiritual awakening. In a similar way, a bored naked saint in the Fantasie über die Kunst encounters the abrupt emergence of music, which serves him as a liberating force. With the first sound of music, the whirring wheel of time had disappeared, the lost genius freed from its earthly soul. In this passage, boredom has given way to a conscious existence devoted to music, announcing Bakenroder's aesthetics put into praxis. In order to elucidate the manner in which art, or more precisely the contemplation of art, can be conceptualized as the nexus that unites romantic boredom with boredom as defined by Schopenhauer, it is imperative to first explore Bakenroder's significant contribution to the Enlightenment theory of sign. In his work, Bakenroder built upon Hammond's concepts, transcending the Enlightenment dichotomy between natural and arbitrary signs. By merging these two categories into a third form, Bakenroder introduced the concept of the sign of art. If according to the enlightened man, the natural sign relates to the signifier, to the things designated by means of a direct and concrete appeal to a visible property of the signified, and the arbitrary sign relates them by convention, Bakenroder adds the artistic sign as a mixture of the latter's powerful capacity to go beyond the world of experience and the former's hereafter and concrete sensorial component. This new sign succeeds in unveiling all the parts of our being in a singular new organ, which captures the celestial marvels and comprehends the heavenly wonders. The language of art, and more specifically music, translates directly to original perceptions of the absolute. It reads as follows: Have you never perceived within yourself the silent song, the muffled dance of invisible spirits? No human artifice can describe the flow of a multiple stream. Language names and describes its transformations, but the art of sound transmits it to us by itself. It boldly seizes the mysterious harp. So, by taking hold of the mysterious harp, music manages to grasp the highest existence precisely in the same way that Schopenhauer refers to it. He says, to know the inner essence of the world is not to ask where from, whence, or why, but exclusively the what of the world. And music refers to this what of the world, so that Bakenroder already prefigures Schopenhauer's ideas. Music is the thing itself, says Bakenroder. Schopenhauer, similarly akin to him, states that music offers the innermost core that precedes all configuration, or the heart of things. A similar observation can be made about the perception of boredom during this period. Ros Velasco states that Hamann wrote in the Socratic Memorabilia that boredom was that one which allowed the movement towards introspection by which the hidden truth manifested itself. And considering the fact that he was a devoted follower of Hamann, it is highly likely that Bakenroder shared this view on boredom. The Romantics viewed boredom as an attribute of genius and considered art to be an intuitive illuminator of man's relationship with the world. They saw it as a coincidentio positorum, or the point of contact between the divine and the human, the infinite and the finite. Inspired by his reading of a widely circulated interpretation of Spinoza's pantheism, Novalis attributes an important mediating role to art, religion, and mathematics between the poles of God equal infinity and God equal nothing. This is the way in which one must understand the boredom of the genius Joseph Bellingham decided to break for a moment with incessant, monotonous alternation of thousands of days by means of art, the great, the enduring, which reaches beyond everything to eternity, so that we hover over the abyss in a tearing position between heaven and earth. From this tearing position, art, knowledge, and boredom become brothers. A very important source of self-knowledge is gained from accepting boredom, so that it becomes akin to Novalis' boredom mountains of the world, from which the lyric eye is able to peer into the beyond. It reads as follows: I feel within me a heavenly weariness. The crystalline wave, unacceptable to the common senses, swells in the dark belly of the hill, at the foot of which the earthly flood breaks. Whoever has tasted it, whoever has stood on the top of the barren mountains of the world, and looked towards the new earth in the night above, truly will not return to the basalt of the world. Yes, sorry. To the earth where the light dwells in eternal restlessness. Sorry. So this celestial weariness or heavenly weariness, which is the chronified situation-dependent boredom experienced by the genius in the early Romantic period, is one of the many limit experiences that partially reveal the original absolute and divine language. So this in-depth study of Backenruder's, Tieck's, and Eichendorff's selected works reveals the fact that they appropriated the motif of boredom to reaffirm the new aesthetic theory. At the same time, of course, they criticized the social and artistic environment that surrounded them, into which the Romantic artist and genius could not fit. While for the Philistine, boredom maintains Kant's negative connotation, so that it serves as a sign of the inability of the settled Biedermeier's writer to engage in a meaningful mental activity, and it is therefore a chronic individual-dependent boredom. The genius, on the contrary, experiences a boredom insofar as it ennobles him intellectually, and as such, given that it always appears as a chronified situation-dependent boredom, it is merely caused by the asphyxiating context and norms of the Enlightenment. So that Backenwood and Tieck turned the boredom of the genius into a mirror, reflecting the meaninglessness of a life without art. As a result, the initial hypothesis of the article appears to be confirmed. The early Romantics' depiction of boredom echoes Schopenhauer's worldview, and what both do intersect in art. So this is all. Thank you so much for listening. Of course, I'm open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we have a few questions. I think I just saw a hand, but I know that Josef has also put something into the chat, so we can maybe start with those. So the first one in the chat is, Julia, do you think that... Oh, hold on. The chat moved while I was trying to read it. Do you think that only geniuses can do genial things in response to boredom, or is this a capacity that the rest of us can train too?
Yeah, of course, I think regardless of if one is a genius or not, I think everyone can respond to boredom by embracing a meaningful existence. Yes, of course, I think so.
Very good. Great. And I think there was a follow-up. Another question is, why all that people think that is a good thing to access the absolute?
That's a very interesting question. I think boredom in this context has to be inserted into a wider context, namely the crisis of language, which took place in the 19th century, and I think the Romantics were really concerned with this, with the crisis of language, and maybe we could identify some roots in this crisis of language, I think, because they were always trying to discover a realm or sphere beyond the limits of language, beyond the limits of rational thought. And so maybe it has some relationship, but I'm not really sure. But I think it can be, it will be very interesting to research further into it. But yes, I think a possible cause is this crisis of language, maybe. But yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Were there any other questions? I thought I saw a hand up, but maybe that was just somebody pushing the wrong button. I'm not sure. Is there anyone else who wanted to add something? One of the things I was maybe going to ask, because I think you kind of touched a little bit on that idea of the sublime. Can you maybe sort of explain a little bit better, like how that fits into these different paths that you were talking about?
Yeah, well, thank you for your question. Yeah, it is also very interesting. I think I must recognize I have always linked the sublime with the late 18th century, so a little bit previous to the early Romantic period, but just a few years previous. Yeah, so yeah, the sublime I think has a lot to do maybe because in so far as it reflects this search for the absolute, or it maybe foreshadows in some way this search because this the detail which is always with latent in the sublime is this feeling of a huge or something being great and very a giant emotion or feeling. So maybe it has, I think, this kind of vision has maybe sowed the seeds for other ideas which were floating in the early romanticism, I think, because of this detail. But to what extent it really has a connection, it will be really interesting to explore it because, yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you so
Yeah,
much once again.
thank you. Thank you. Thank all of you for your interesting questions.
Great, cool. I think in that case we are sort of ready, unless there was any other. No, I don't think there was anything. Anyone else? Any questions? No. Last chance.